What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch here, back with a NFL comparison video. I haven't done one of these in a while, but for this 2018 NFL offseason, I'm going to make this a normal thing. I'm going to make this a weekly series on the Bottom Line View. It's going to be NFL comparison videos between players, teams, coaches. I'm going to break down some of the best at every one of those positions. This video happens to be a team comparison between the 1990 Giants versus the 2017 Eagles. Also in the past, I've done comparisons like Manning and Brady, Brady and Montana, Moss and Rice. If you guys want to see any comparisons that I have yet to do, make sure you leave a comment below and I'll add it to the list. But I'm starting to do these videos once a week, because these are some of the best videos on the channel. These are some of the most fun videos to make and research, and I think that you guys also enjoy them a lot as well. If you're new to the Bottom Line View, make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's get into the video. So this is the 1990 Giants versus the 2017 Eagles. You may be wondering why I'm comparing these two teams. Well, the 2017 Eagles just came off a victory against the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 53. The 1990 Giants were also a Super Bowl winner, and they beat the Buffalo Bills on the game that everybody knows is wide right. So I wanted to make a comparison because there are a lot of comparisons within the teams themselves. They had two backup quarterbacks lead their teams to the promised land, lead their teams to the Super Bowl, and lead their teams to Super Bowl wins. They're both NFC East teams. They're both teams built on great defense and a strong running game. And they're both teams that are just very comparable in a lot of ways. And there were a lot of direct comparisons that a lot of analysts throughout the NFL were making between the 2017 Eagles and the 1990 Giants. So I figured, why not compare these two teams and see which one's better? So starting off, we are going to compare teams by just looking at the simple statistics, those points for, yards, passing offenses, rushing defenses, all that sort of stuff. So let's start off with the points for. The Eagles were the more potent offense of the two teams. Of course, taking into account that Phil Simms of the New York Giants did get injured, and Carson Wentz also did get injured. These two teams, and they almost played identical time, too. I believe that Simms played maybe one more game than Carson Wentz did. Even that being said, the Eagles did finish higher in their year in points for. The Giants were just a mediocre offense, not a ton of talent overall. They had a few players like Mark Bavaro, Mark Ingram, a pretty strong running game, a couple good offensive linemen, but they were built around their defense, and they were a team that played good complementary football. While Philadelphia, for the most part of this season, yes, they had a really strong defense built on a good defensive line. They had a potent offense as well, and Carson Wentz was on pace to win the MVP award, and he ended up throwing the most touchdowns, I believe, in the NFL in the 2017 season, despite missing all those games. So the Eagles, overall, better offense, scoring points-wise. Points against is a different story. Although the Eagles were a very good defense at keeping teams out of the end zone, the Giants, honestly, one of the best defenses of all time at keeping teams out of the end zone. First that year in 1990, and the Eagles number 4 this past year. Yards wise, again, Eagles take it on offense and Giants take it on defense. So we're tied up after points for, points against, yards for, and yards against. Well, the Eagles, the better offense, and the Giants, the better defense overall. Turnovers. So I added this category into there. The Giants were actually the #1 team at not giving the football away. That is why their offense worked so well with their defense, and that is why they were able to pull off this victory in the Super Bowl and go on this run, because the Giants simply did not turn the football over. While the Eagles were a pretty conservative team, they didn't often turn the ball over too much. The Eagles did only finish 11th this past season in turnovers given away. The Eagles were better than the Giants were in 1990, though, at taking the football away. That was one of the Eagles' strengths, their pass rush and their ability to, cause havoc with receivers, their ability to intercept passes, cause fumbles, get their ball back for their offense, was better than the Giants. 4th overall for the Eagles and 8th for the Giants. Passing offenses, not great either way. Eagles, middle of the pack at 13th. Giants, more closer to the end of the pack, 22nd. Passing defense, the Giants were overall a better passing defense. Not only did that, they have Lawrence Taylor and Carl Banks and these incredible linebackers to get after the quarterback in their 3-4 scheme, but they also had very good corners as well. So the Giants were able to lock down passing. They finished 6th that year. The Eagles 17th. Rushing offenses, both very strong facets of both teams. The Giants finished 8th. The Eagles finished 3rd, so the Eagles also take that category. And then the rushing defense, the Giants finished 4th, top 5 in the NFL, very, very good that year, but the Eagles finished 1st. So the Eagles, that was really their strength all year in defense. They wouldn't allow any teams to run the football, which caused them into bad situations on 3rd down to get after them with their pass rush. So overall, the Philadelphia Eagles seem to be the stronger team when we take a look at the statistics overall, including their record where both teams finished with a 13-3 record, very even there on that front. But the Eagles, better points for, better yards, better turnovers, takeaways, better passing offense, a better running offense, and a better running defense. Well, the Giants had a better pass defense, better turnovers in terms of not giving the football away, yards against, and points against. So the Eagles overall take that category. Then we move on to looking at both teams' regular seasons and how they did during the regular season. So a little bit of a background on the Giants. It's been a long time since 1990. I personally wasn't alive. So the regular season for the Giants, after a 12-4 record in 1989, and they had a first-round bye in 1989. They were actually upset in that divisional round. So the Giants were previously already a good team. We know that the Giants won the Super Bowl in 1986 as well. So this was a team with championship pedigree. This was a team throughout the Phil Simms, Bill Parcells era, was a very competitive, good team, a regular playoff participant. And they've started off 1990 as the best team in the NFL. They started off 10-0. And in half of those games in that 10-0 run, they only allowed single digits and had a plus 16 turnover differential. So the Giants, through their first 10 games of the season, seemed like the clear Super Bowl champion. They seemed like the clear best team in the NFL, and they seemed like a team on their way to glory in 1990. As for the Eagles, they were a team that had a 9-game winning streak throughout the season. It didn't start in week 1. It wasn't a 9-0 run, but after week 2, they went on a 9-game winning streak. Before that was eventually shut down by the Seattle Seahawks. And they were a team opposite to the Giants. They kind of came out of nowhere, and they were riding this MVP incredible year from Carson Wentz, this high belief in their locker room from guys like Jenkins and Chris Long, and these very good personalities, LeGarrette Blount and Doug Pederson, who was becoming this confident, great play caller. So a little bit different in terms of that direction of how the Eagles were sort of an underdog from the very start, while the Giants sort of were a team that everybody expected to be in the playoffs, but they didn't necessarily expect to be the best team in the league. They took that 10-0 run, and then people were starting to look out for the Giants. And then something happened where Phil Simms got hurt, and then everybody counted the Giants out. The same thing happened with the Eagles. Everybody counted them out once Nick Foles was named their starting quarterback. Jeff Hostetler was also named the quarterback for the New York Giants. So once Phil Simms and Carson Wentz go down, this is where the parallels start to begin, and this is where these two teams basically set on a path of destiny and set on a path that's very identical. Looking at the Giants, they ended up with a 13-3 record, like I previously stated, as well as the Eagles also ending up with a 13-3 record. Looking at the teams that they lost to compare how difficult their schedules were and how good of a team they were, the Giants did end up losing 3 games, one to the division foe Eagles, who finished 10-6, also made the playoffs. 14-2 49ers, who were the Super Bowl champions and went to the NFC Championship game, and the Buffalo Bills, who they would also face in the Super Bowl. So it's interesting. that the Buffalo Bills did beat them during the regular season, but the Giants were able to come back in the Super Bowl and defeat them in the Super Bowl with one of the greatest game plans that anybody's ever made up. Bill Belichick, Bill Parcells, their game plan defensively to take away the Buffalo Bills' great offense is something special, and you can watch that obviously on the Bill and Bill ESPN special, so you could check that out if you want. Total sidebar. But the Giants, I would say, lost to superior teams. While the Eagles did lose to teams like the 10-6 Chiefs, the 9-7 Seahawks, and the Cowboys in Week 17. Yes, they did rest starters in Week 17, but still it counts as a loss. And all these teams were less-er than the teams that the Giants lost to. When you're considering a team that went to the Super Bowl, a team that was the Super Bowl champion, and then also a division foe who was a playoff team. So the Eagles really only lost to one playoff team during the regular season, and that was the Kansas City Chiefs. So overall, the strength of defeat was not as good as New York's was. So I give New York a slight edge in that category, looking at how well they performed during the regular season. Now, moving on to the playoffs, both playoff roads are super impressive. Looking at both these playoff roads, they're also extremely comparable and almost identical. The Giants defeated a NFC North champion, the Bears, 31-3. The Eagles defeated, in the NFC Championship game, the NFC North champion by a blowout as well. So both teams beat the Bears and the Vikings, NFC North champions, by a lot of points. The Giants, I thought, this is the Nick Foles show, basically was the coming out party of Nick Foles all the way in the NFC Championship game. That's crazy to think about, against the Minnesota Vikings. Well, the Giants, they ran the ball against the Bears, 194 yards in that game, and that is really what started to allow them to win this Super Bowl. Was they had a strong run game, Hostetler didn't make a lot of mistakes, and their defense was unreal. So those two are comparable in that way. And then we get to the next thing, which the Giants, they traveled on the road in the NFC Championship game, which the Eagles never had to travel on the road. So the Giants travel on the road in the NFC Championship game to take on the reigning Super Bowl champion, Joe Montana, San Francisco 49ers, with Jerry Rice, the dynasty. And the Giants upset the 49ers in San Francisco 15-3. Not only did they shut down that offense and upset the 49ers, but they also knock out Joe Montana for like a year and a half. He doesn't play again until like 1991, 1992. He doesn't play for a long time. The Giants dominated that game defensively, and that's how they were able to advance. You could also take a look at, a team like the New England Patriots, who, no, the Eagles didn't dominate them the same way. They did win by more points, margin of victory, but they also played the reigning Super Bowl champion. Joe Montana and Tom Brady are pretty comparable. And then you look at, the reigning Super Bowl champion and the dynasty. And this was in a year, 1989, where I believe Joe Montana already had 4 Super Bowl wins. So these two teams had to knock out very similar opponents. And then the other one, the Atlanta Falcons, for the Eagles, was a team that went to the Super Bowl, was the NFC NFC champion the season before, and they beat them 15-10, which was a really good game and really defensive game. And then for the Giants, they beat the Bills, who were basically a perennial team to get to the Super Bowl and lose. So very much like the Falcons, they were a team that always won the AFC Championship, but could never get over the hump and win the Super Bowl. So there's a lot of comparables there. Overall, I look at this run for both teams, and to me, the Giants is slightly more impressive. The reason why the Giants is slightly more impressive is because they had to go on the road once. And I know that the Eagles did technically dominate their opponents more, but the Eagles never had to go on the road. I feel like even as great as the Eagles were, if they would have had to go on the road in the divisional or the conference championship game, things may have been different, or at least a little bit closer. Now, the Giants, to me, going on the road against a dynasty team like the 49ers, who, to me, were a stronger team in 1990 than the Patriots were this year, I think that's an extremely impressive victory for the Giants to win that game, and then advance the Super Bowl, and then still be the underdog against the Bills and come out on top. Yes, they had to get a missed field goal in order to win the game, but that was ultra impressive. I just don't think the Eagles had to play quite the same opponent level in the playoffs. Like, you're talking about playing, yeah, the NFC champion, but they weren't quite as good as they were last year. This offense was nothing like it was Atlanta's was the season before. The Patriots, as a Patriots fan, I can tell you this Patriots team wasn't nearly as good. Yes, they were a good team. They made the Super Bowl, and they deserve credit for that win. But I just look at the Giants' strength of victory, beating the 49ers and the Bills, two teams that I think are very strong historical teams. While the Eagles, yes, they beat the Patriots, but the Vikings with Case Keenum, they'll be forgotten. And Atlanta, they'll be forgotten as well. So just comparing them both, I think the Giants' strength of victory was a little bit better in the playoffs. If you disagree, let me know in the comments section. All right. Now let's take a look at their rosters and their coaching. So before diving into their rosters, we're going to take a look at their coaches. This was very hard to do just because the Eagles are relatively unknown at this point. Doug Pederson has the Super Bowl win, but he's like a 2-year head coach. Jim Schwartz, yeah, we know what he's done as a defensive coordinator and a head coach. Pretty good coach overall, has been an extremely good defensive coordinator, but an average head coach. DeFilippo is going to go get a job with the Vikings as the offensive coordinator. We'll see how he does there. And they also have Reich, who is the offensive coordinator, but doesn't have any other previous experience. And this isn't a team that, before this Super Bowl win, had any Super Bowl experience. Even stripping away what we know about Bill Parcells, Bill Belichick, Tom Coughlin, Romeo Crennel, and these guys that were on the Giants staff, we take a look and we see that the Giants in 1990 probably had the best coaching staff in the NFL, because they already won a Super Bowl in 1986. They had arguably the best head coach in Bill Parcells, or one of them, and they had probably the best defensive coordinator in Bill Belichick across the league. They also had, other guys behind that. Earhart was the offensive coordinator, pretty respected. And then you have Tom Coughlin, who we know what he's done, and Romeo Crennel as a defensive coordinator has been one of the best in the past 20 years. So just comparing the staffs, the Giants overall, even if we strip away what we know now, looking before 1990, the Giants were the better staff overall. And I think that even though the Eagles did an amazing job of coaching up this team in the playoffs, and what Pederson did and Schwartz did and DeFilippo and all these guys can't be taken for granted because they were unreal. And they probably, game for game, the whole entire season, were the best coaching staff this year. But for the Giants and what they did against the Bills and what they did against the 49ers and how they swapped this team with Hostetler at quarterback, I think is just speaks to how great those coaches were even then. And that's why I have to give them the advantage there. So the coaching does go to the Giants. Then we're going to compare the rosters. Now, the rosters, very, very close, very similar. Quarterbacks, we're looking at Sims and Hostetler versus Wentz and Foles. Now, Sims actually was playing an MVP-like season. I believe his numbers were something like 15 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, which was very good at that time, and especially in considering a touchdown-interception ratio. And Sims was a Super Bowl winning quarterback at that point, had one of the greatest Super Bowl performances in NFL history, and was a very good quarterback. And to me, he's a borderline Hall of Fame quarterback. But we can't take that into account because we're only looking at this season's performance. That being said, I believe that Nick Foles outperformed Hostetler as the quarterback of the Eagles, and I also believe that Wentz did have a better season than Sims back in 1990. Then, Wentz, I thought, had an MVP, could have been the MVP of 2017, for sure. So that being said, I think the Eagles had the better quarterback play overall in 2017. Now, will Wentz be better than Phil Simms in a career span? Maybe, maybe not, but we won't judge that at this moment. Looking at the running backs, Anderson, Hampton, and Meggett versus Blunt, Ajayi, and Clement. I have to give it to the Giants. Now, I do respect the Eagles and running backs and what they did, especially in the Super Bowl. Blunt, Ajayi, Clement all had really good games. They all served a different purpose. They're all very talented runners. But I just think that the Giants needed their running backs more, and they were more reliant on their running backs to make plays. Anderson was their leading rusher, Hampton was a dual threat player, and Meggett was one of their leading receivers on their team. So that being said, I think the running backs had more to do with the success of the Giants. That's why I'm giving them the edge. Wide receiver tight end matchup, this is easy for me. This is the Eagles. Even though the Giants do have Bavaro, who is a great tight end, and they also have Mark Ingram, a very underrated receiver, the Eagles had more depth and they had more playmakers. Alshon Jeffrey, Zach Ertz, Nelson Aguilar, Trey Burton, Smith as well. So these are all players that stepped their game up in the playoffs. And again, just like the running backs were more reliant in New York, I think the receivers and the tight ends had to do more with the success of the Eagles than the Giants. So I'm going to go with the Eagles there. Offensive lines, again, very tough. 2 Pro Bowlers for the Giants and a couple of Pro Bowlers for the Eagles as well. When I look at it player for player, line for line, even with Vaitai in the lineup, I think I'm still going to lean towards the Eagles. You think about Jason Peters. He didn't even really play a lot of the season, but he's a borderline, Hall of Fame player. Brandon Brooks was an all-pro, Pro Bowler. Kelsey, a all-pro, Pro Bowler. Lane Johnson, all-pro, Pro Bowler. So just out of their line, they have like 4 or 5 or 3 or 5 guys that are all-pro players. And then the offensive line for the Giants was very good, but they did also have some weaknesses, and they weren't as good in the pass blocking. So I'm going to go with the Eagles overall in the offensive line. Defensive line, I'm also going with the Eagles. Yes, Howard, Dorsey, Washington. Howard was a Pro Bowl player, but looking at the Eagles, Fletcher Cox is one of the best D linemen in the league. Brandon Graham, you could say the same. The Eagles had so many different guys that played a role along their defensive line, and overall the 4-3 defense relies more on their defensive line than the 3-4 defense does. So I'm going to go with the defensive line of the Eagles. The linebackers, I'm definitely going with the Giants. No question about it. You talk about Banks, Johnson, and Lawrence Taylor. It doesn't get much better than that. I'm going with the Giants over Kendricks, Bradham, Hicks. Doesn't really matter. Giants all the way. Cornerbacks, Everson Walls, Mark Collins versus Mills, Robinson, and Darby. I'm going with the Giants as well. Basically based off Everson Walls alone, because he was by far the best corner of any of these guys. And overall, looking at the statistics, 6th best pass defense compared to like 17th or something like that. I think the Giants do deserve the edge there. Safety play, I'm going to go with the Eagles, though. Malcolm Jenkins is better than both of the guys on the Giants. And, Guyton and Jackson, they didn't really accomplish much. They were never an all-pro. They were never Pro Bowlers. Yeah, they had pretty good seasons in 1990, but I thought Malcolm Jenkins was the best player overall, so that alone, I'm going to go with the Eagles for the safeties. Special teams, I'm going with the Giants because basically Landetta was one of the best punters of all time, doesn't get a lot of respect. Meggett was a great punt and kick returner, and that alone, I'm going to go with the Giants. So overall, looking at it, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, corner, safety, special teams. The tally is 5-4 for the Eagles on the roster front. That ends up being the final comparison between both teams. We went through the rosters. We went through their playoffs. We went through their coaching. We went through their regular season. We went through their statistics. We went through who I felt was more impressive all year long in each individual category. And the total tally ends up being extremely close, but it's the 1990 Giants who are overall slightly better, in my opinion, as the team that, to me, I just believe their defense was an all-time great defense. And that, to me, where the Eagles, yes, they were probably the better all-around team, defense, offense, and like playing well on both sides, complementary style. But the Giants' defense and dominant defense, I think, coupled with their coaching, which was superb, with their championship pedigree, with their ability to run the football, and have a couple of playmakers like Ingram and Bavaro in big spots make plays. I think the Giants slightly outdo the Eagles' amazing story, but it's not by much. I mean, both these teams are extremely comparable. You could argue either way, but to me, the Giants, specifically based off their defense, is the better team to me, and I think that if these two teams were to play, the Giants would end up winning the game. So I hope you guys enjoyed this comparison between the 1990 Giants and the 2017 Eagles. If you did enjoy, you could check out the rest of my comparisons. There's a playlist. Also, comment your opinions on this video, and also comment what you want to see next on the comparison series. Every single Friday, I will release a comparison video between teams, coaches, players. It doesn't matter. Anything NFL, hit me up in the comments section. It's Mitch of TheBottomLineView. Again, hope you enjoyed. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and peace out.